Great. Now that we're all at our seats, I'll call this meeting to order. Mark, putting our acknowledgement of the traditional lands, please.
The land upon which we work, live, and sustain ourselves is the ancestral and treaty lands of the Michizagig Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit, the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land. We also recognize the rich pre-contact history and relationships which include the Anishinaabe and the Ongwe Hongwe.
Since European contact, this land continues to be home to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As responsible community members, we value the diversity, dignity, and worth of all people.
Colonialism displaced and dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their ancestral land
and continues to deny their basic human rights, dignities, and freedoms.
We are committed to learning true history to reconcile, make reparations, and fulfill our treaty obligations to the original peoples and our collective responsibilities to the lands, water, animals, and each other for future generations.
Thank you, Mark. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this Budget Development Committee meeting. We have an agenda ahead of us. Who would like to put that on the floor? I think Trustee Clark, you're on the committee, and Trustee Cameron, I think you're on the committee. I will second it. Any comments, questions? All those in favor of the agenda? So approved. Okay, we're going to go to a declaration of conflict of interest. Does anyone have any conflicts of interest to declare? Seeing none, we'll move to approval of the minutes from the last budget meeting on May 6th. So do I have, I guess, Trustee Davies, would you put that on the floor? And who else? Trustee Bailey, would you second that? Any comments or questions about the meeting on May 6th? Seeing none, all those in favor of the receipt of the meeting minutes, so approved. Okay, we have no delegations, but delegations are available for this committee. If anyone wants to talk about the budget process, we'd love to hear the public and feedback in there. So we're going to go straight to staff reports. We have 3 reports today. 7.1 will be the high-level core education funding announcement and changes presented, I assume, by Tanya and Alicia Charles. And before I start, I just want to say thank you so much. I understand you got this Friday afternoon and worked the weekend to make this happen for me today. So I much appreciate it. Turn over to the Associate Director, Jess Paul-Gillis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask now into County Officials to take us to the presentation. Then we'll be happy to answer any questions or clarifications you may have.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. And I appreciate your acknowledgement, but I actually have to acknowledge my team, who I think are actually online this evening. There's Agnes Ramena, Lisa Hutchinson, Michelle Pollock, and Copper here with me as well. The team worked really hard this weekend because, as you know, there was probably 300 pages of our technical paper with other memos that we're going to go through. So today we're going to go through the revenue portion of the changes to the funding. So to start, we'll just kind of recapture what the goals are of the budget process, which is really to balance our budget and meet our student achievement needs and our board strategic priorities. As always, we have challenges. This year as well, the challenges, of course, around enrollment decline, which continues. Inflationary cost pressures, as we know, there's lots of things happening, things like inflation, tariffs, and the ministry funding, which is another element, which we know through the media as well, has not fully funded for some of these areas of cost pressures. And finally, we have to also make sure that we try and incorporate our board priorities within the budget. So those are our challenges as we get out of the budget process. In terms of the announcement, the core ed funding was released on Friday. It is the main source of funding for boards. So, we really don't make a lot of money elsewhere. So we really have to try and make sure that we make the funding meet our needs. And really the ministry signals what they expect us to do, but based on what they fund and what they don't fund. One thing as we go through the summary that I'm going to do and the more detailed the Copper is going to share, you will see that there's really no new money. And there is a desire for greater accountability from the boards, and we'll talk about that as well. And in terms of no new money, it's what that means is really the only funding that we are receiving is for the collective bargaining increases that are mandated. And so those are really kind of a flow through. So even though I know in the media we hear there's lots of additional funding, that is correct. The ministry is flowing additional funds to all boards. However, most of those funds, not all are almost all flow through funds that have to meet staffing needs. When looking at the operating revenue streams, this is just to kind of reiterate sort of how where our funding is or where our revenue streams are. You will see that the core ed funding is 90%. The RAPs, which is a responsive funding programs, are what we call the TPAs or transfer payment agreements for specific activities, and those actually only make up about 1%. So those aren't actually the main source of our revenue. And lastly, we have about 1% in other revenue, and those things would be things like interest revenue, international students, and permits and rental fees. So that would be the remainder. So last year, the ministry changed what we used to call the GSN into something called Core Ed, and within that, they kind of made it up into 6 different funds. We're also still kind of getting used to the terminology, so that the funds are classroom staffing, learning resources, special education, school facilities, student transportation, and school board administration. So, and so I will go through briefly the funds, and I will kind of highlight any changes within those funds. But before I do that, I just wanted to kind of talk about sort of our enrollment because, and I know we've seen this slide before, slightly in a different format, but I just thought I would bring in our ADE to show it. But most of the grants in the core ed, as they were GSN, are really linked to enrollment in some way through formulas. And when we say enrollment, it's actually a 2-point count. One is in October and one is in March. So, and if you look on the right, you will see the change in our enrollment at the different levels. And when I say different levels, I mean JK to SK, grade 1 to 3, grade 4 to 8, and then secondary. And the only reason it's important to kind of see that breakdown is because actually there's different benchmarks are different funding flows at the different levels. And so, for example, you will see that our greatest area of decline is in SKJK. And that actually, as you see later, whereas actually when we get the higher benchmarks, we get more funding initially for JK, only because we also have ECEs and other costs in there. So, so overall, going into 25-26, we're expecting an overall decline of 957 students, with secondary increasing a bit, but elementary decreasing by 1384 overall students. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth, but I just want to recap because we didn't have that more in-depth review of how the core ed funding works. And I'm going to talk about these 2 funds together, the classroom staffing and the learning resources, because they're really what is considered in the classroom type staffing. It's really either the staff or the non-staff components within the school. So the first piece in the first box is really the classroom staffing fund, and it really encompasses direct in the classroom, not just the school, in the classroom specifically, and that's where you get your teachers, ECE, supply teachers, costs, that's there. And you can see on the right the changes, what we call benchmark. So the way the ministry does it, through class size, it determines how many teachers you need, and then it attributes a certain benchmark, which is a salary cost to those teachers. And in the end, then they kind of average it out as to how much you get per student. You will notice that the benchmarks have increased by 3%. So that 3% is the increase in salary. So through collective agreements, there was an increase in salaries of about 2.5% for most of the groups, and $1 an hour for education workers. The reason you see 3% is because obviously that's the salary component, but there's a benefit component. So the two together are roughly about 3%. And you can see consistently spot on exactly 3% that we received, nothing more in those areas. You will see also in secondary, right below, you can see that they've changed the credit load a little bit between in-person and online. So last year, when they did the benchmarks, sort of the expectation of how many teachers you would need, they were using the assumption that 32.5% of students would have at least one online course. And now they've kind of dialed that back a bit, and now their expectations have gone to that 16% of students would have at least one online course in secondary. So again, that changes some calculations a bit. So that's what the benchmarks mean. The second half of the slide, where it starts with principals and vice principals, that's underneath the Learning Resources Fund. And those are the costs kind of in the broader school. Some of them in the classroom for non-classroom supplies, but those are still within the school. And you can see in terms on the right, again, there is differences attributed to the benchmarks there. In this case, you will see that the benchmarks have increased by 2%. And the reason it's 2% here versus the 3% is because these are mainly non-salary. So overall, what the ministry did is for the non-salary components, they increased only by 2% to account for inflation. And you will see that the grade 7 to 8 supplementary is actually 3%, and that's because that's really the fund where the funding is for the guidance counselors. So you can see they're being pretty consistent. Where there's non-staffing, it's 2%, and where there's more staffing, it's 3%. So that's kind of how it's worked in terms of the changes in funding. Within in the same two funds, other things that are within sort of the classroom and the school are the language. So again, we are funded for the language grant. It also falls within this area. If you recall, this is where we get funded for individuals that come into Canada, and there's a 4-year kind of scale in terms of when they've entered. After COVID, they had something called an immigration supplement, which helped boards who lost funding because of that. So they kind of did a kind of a baseline at that point. This year they're removing it because immigration rates have come back, and it's viewed that that's no longer an impact. And for us, that is correct. So we are back to pre-COVID levels. So in terms of that, so that's not going to impact us negatively for the withdrawing of that supplement. So we're about, and then overall, they're also doing. There's a second year phase in the census, and the census component was related to individuals or students that would have English as a second language, but that are not recent immigrants. So again, so overall in that particular fund, we have seen an increase in funding. When we look at the next one, which is local circumstances staffing, most of that funding there is to kind of supplement the salaries because some teachers have a greater qualification and experience. In this particular grant, we're experiencing a decline, and that's because we have fewer teachers, so therefore the grant's going to come down. And you will see, technically, this is kind of a flow-through grant. Whatever we get here has to pay for the extra teacher salary component. Looking at the Indigenous staffing and supports, there hasn't been much change here. And the one thing that was mentioned is that they would only fund an Indigenous lead if you actually hire an Indigenous lead. So for us, we already have an Indigenous lead, so that's not a concern. But they made that a strict stipulation now. The next one is the student success staffing and supports. And in here, there's various grants to support student success. There's a demographic component there as well, and this is another area where they're transitioning to the 2021 census versus the 2006 census. So this is the third year of that transition. Unfortunately, it hasn't provided us a lot additional funding, and between our enrollment decline and everything else, it's pretty much flat in that area as well in terms of bringing us any additional funding. And again, this particular area has specific restrictions on what the different components of those funds can be used for. And just maybe I did mention that Indigenous obviously is enveloped as well. So the Indigenous grant is also very strict in that if we don't use it for Indigenous and the board action plan, then we have to defer it to for future years, but for exactly the same purpose. So that can work towards any kind of supporting us in any other areas. So special education, that's, I would say, the third largest grant that we get, if you remember the original pie chart, and it has 4 components. Again, the first component is largest, and unfortunately, because it's a per pupil base, it's going down. And again, so when you see the numbers, though, it looks like it's going up, but the dollars there that you will see are really for staffing. Differentiated needs allocation, within that, there is 2 specific areas. There's how it's calculated. One is the measures of variability, and the other one is statistical prediction model. So again, there was a formula change, and also they're moving in terms of the census to updated 2021. But again, we're finding that we're not getting a lot of additional funds in this area. And when we were looking at some of the variables they're looking at, it may be that just the mix of where we are, because they are also attributing additional monies for things like remote and rural, and other things that French language, northern adjustment that we don't qualify for. So I don't know if that's causing us not to get a lot of additional funding, even though they're using a more updated census. The complex supports allocation. That allocation is for students that need additional care, and for potentially students that need more than one caregiver at the school for safety or learning. And also within that, there's also a component for children in care. Again, overall, it's relatively flat. Most of the increase is really, again, around salaries. This year as well, after COVID, especially the SIP component within that, we used to have to submit a lot of documentation. After COVID, they removed that because it was quite onerous. And now they're simply sort of using a little bit of projection, so that's not really helping us, because I think our second department feels that our needs are growing, but the way they're calculating it has kind of really left it a bit flat, because we're not able to submit the actual needs that we have. And the last component is special equipment allocation, again, and that's been relatively flat in terms of the funding. So there's really no change there. School facilities funding, that is for our schools, the operations. And so really it is both components. One is the school operations allocation, the other one is school renewal. Both of them are based on have enrollment components. So there's some reduction there. Obviously, there's increases related both to salaries and also the 2% for inflationary increases. But I think sometimes the cost pressures that we have in some of these areas are a lot higher than the 2%. In terms of school renewal, this was implemented last year, but just as a reminder, again, the ministry does, is seeing that school boards, I should say, some have accumulated some school renewal funding, because again, you can only do a lot of the work in the summer, and everybody's competing for resources, so sometimes there's a backlog. But now they've actually indicated that you have whatever is being allocated to you has to be spent within 2 years. So they're trying to reduce any accumulation that boards have in those areas. So. Student transportation, that again, there was a funding change last year, and so the updates to routing have been submitted. So for us, we have submitted routings for our regional programs. So that has provided some additional funding there. Obviously, they've updated the benchmark busing cost, and again, things like driver retention bonuses as well as fuel price adjustment, and those have to more or less be flowed through to the consortium. So again, no real new money here. And the school board administration, that's the last fund. Again, it covers predominantly all our sort of operation or back office type stuff. So this year, this is predominantly where they have kind of put an accountability measure. And again, the accountability measure, it was there last year, just to be clear. So last year it started, but last year the limit was 2.1 million at the base and 3.5% as for total operating. This year, they have slightly increased the base, but they've reduced the percentage to 3.44. We've looked at our numbers quickly, and we don't foresee a problem in terms of where we're at. So, but really, they've also this year, which is new though, even though the limit was there last year, is they've created sort of the rules around non-compliance. So it's basically in the first year of non-compliance, basically the board would have to provide a report and publish it on our website or a website indicating how we're planning to get back to within compliance. In the second year of non-compliance, you have to hire a third party. And then in the third year of non-compliance, the minister will actually come and tell you what to do based on what your consultant has advised. So those are the compliance measures that they now articulated for that. So that kind of a quick go through all of our 6 funds. So just kind of a recap. So basically 98% of our funding, enrollment, we talked about that. And also, as I said, no real new money and additional accountability. So with that, I guess we will, I'll take questions before we get into the actual numbers. We don't want to get happy about the numbers with the increases. That's what I wanted to kind of first talk about.
Thank you very much for the presentation and your team. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I know you've been waiting for these numbers, so now you can get started on process that's going to end on July 2nd when we actually have a budget in front of us. So before we have any conversations around what was presented, I'd like to put this on the floor. Trustee Campbell, would you put it on the floor? Seconded by Trustee Bailey. Okay, so now it's on the floor. Who has any questions? Trustee Alves?
Thank you, Chair, through you. So obviously disappointed to hear about the special education funding. I think disappointed in general, but specifically for the special education funding, have we had any conversation with the ministry to discuss why they're choosing not to invest in those students? It seems like of all the buckets at high level, it looks like they're probably most disproportionately impacted.
Future, I mean, I can start from what I know. I mean, certainly I know all boards are having ongoing discussions because I think all boards are feeling it, and a lot of boards are in a deficit specifically within their spec ed funding. I know our own spec ed group has been speaking to the ministry as well. I think SEAC has reached out, so there's been different methods, but I don't think as yet it has been successful.
Okay. Thank you.
Trustee Clark.
Thank you, through you, Chair. You mentioned the infrastructure fund and how I guess we now only have one more year. That's like this 2-year rollout, right?
Through you, Chair. So the way it would work is any year, so for example, this year we will get a certain amount of funds. So the funds that we get this year, we have 2 years. So the years that are going to expire, let's say next year, will be from 23-24.
Okay, thank you for that. Again, through your chair. Are we one of the school boards that had developed a surplus in that? And is there anything we can do besides infrastructure with that money? Although I'm going to assume not because of the agreement.
So
through you, Chair McDonald, yes, we do have a surplus, like every other board in the province has surplus. And the main rationale behind that is that the challenge of getting the work done.
Yeah.
Because it's mainly the summer. But we were aware of this coming, and so for the last year and a half, staff has been more aggressive in planning and executing, and there will not be any problem us meeting with the 2-year timelines.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Trustee Promola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again for all of the work. I know that this has been a real sprint when it should probably be a marathon, but we really appreciate everything that you've done to bring us this information and to help deliver to us in a way that we can really, dig into it. I do want to echo my colleagues' remarks, Trustee Alves, speaking about the spec ed funding. It does seem like it's time for a conversation about the way that the formula that we use for funding special education across school boards, because if we're looking at per pupil funding as opposed to needs-based, then it seems like we're missing the best way to meet the needs of students. Am I understanding this correctly, that we are looking at an overhead number of students throughout the board as opposed to considering the real needs within the school board to make sure that we're funding properly?
To each year. So there's several components. So that one of the larger components is per pupil base. So it looks at all our students and gives us a certain dollar value for that. And then there's other components that are supposed to be needs based, and they look at things like EQAO, family income, and that's where they use the census. But that's what I'm saying is it doesn't seem that the move to using the census and updating it has really delivered significant additional funds to us.
Okay. Please.
So through you, Chair McDonald, if I can just add to it, starting last year, there was other component which is complex post allocation, and Natasha Charles talks about it. It used to be based on the paperwork. And based on the paperwork of your needs, and they'll assess that to make sure it's all in line, and you'll get the funding based on that. And I think that used to be a bit too much work for the ministry, so they made it easier for themselves. Oh, starting from now on, starting last year, your funding will be based on your previous years. Whereas for us, over the last couple of years at least, our needs are in the spec as it is gone. So that means regardless of our expenditures, we're getting the funding based on the previous 2-3 year 4 years. So that's another area where we're getting less money now as compared to the previous times. So that's the challenge in the spec ed. I'll say that from ministry's point of view, I think they see that this way of allocation helps other boards. That's the challenge. So it helps some of the other boards because their overall enrollment is going up, but their spec ed needs are not as high as ours. So when you allocate this way, it does help.
Well, through you, Chair, I really appreciate the explanation. I think that's very helpful in understanding the way that the funding is rolling out and the disproportionate way that the funding is rolling out, the way that that's affecting our students here in Peel. I think that every kid deserves to have the support they need, and if that's not working, then I'd love to see a way that we can have a conversation about advocating for a change in the funding formula. I recognize it's complicated and this might be easier, but I'm not interested in easier, I'm interested in better. So through you, Chair, if it's okay, I just have 2 more questions and I'll be quick. So you said that while our enrollment is down, that we're seeing that immigration has actually stabilized and has returned to pre-COVID levels. So we're still seeing a decrease in enrollment, despite the fact that what is a sort of a normal trend here in Peel has sort of resumed, and that's the case.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing, and I think even planning starting to try and track, because we do see people coming into the we welcome the world centers. However, overall our enrollment is declining. So when we're looking at it, I think when people settle after a while, they do tend to move out of the region just due to the cost. So I think that's what's causing the factor, but we are definitely having the levels go back to pre-COVID levels.
Okay, and I really appreciate that clarity through you, Chair, especially because there is additional need when people are first coming into our community and they're settling, wanting to make sure we're meeting the needs of new Canadians and new students who are settling here. That is additional need that requires additional support. So it's unfortunate we're losing the funding that helps make sure that we are helping students get settled before they leave us. So I'm disappointed to see that leaving us, recognizing that is a unique need that we have here in Peel. It's not something we necessarily see throughout Ontario, that we definitely don't see throughout Ontario. That's us. This is our community. Just the final thing through you, Chair. So I just want to be abundantly clear. While we're seeing a noted increase in per pupil funding, that is in respect to the increases in compensation for staff because of collective bargaining. There is no new additional funds that is being increased for per pupil funding for any of our students, correct? So there's nothing that's new that's student facing. It's just money that's going for compensation.
Through you, Chair, that's correct. We will see when Father goes through it, she will break it down between the two. There is very minimal, but again, as I mentioned, there's the non-staffing components versus the 2%. So you'll see that as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful. Some, staff is, they're getting a 2% raise per contract, so we're getting paid for that, and that's fine. But it's the, let's say items that go in the classroom, that's not keeping up with inflation.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
So we're actually losing.
Yeah.
Look at it in the real world. Yeah. And if you look at construction and the renovation, you can't tell me I go to the Home Depot and it's only 2% more than last year or something. So again, I just want to clarify that. So I have online, and then I'll come over here. Trustee Benjamin, I have your hand up. See this up here. Okay, I'm going to now go to Trustee Bailey.
Through you, Chair, just to be clear on what Trustee Pomone is asking, that 3% is reflective of per pupil funding is reflective of in their collective bargaining agreement. If you compare it, it would be reflective of that. So that's straight.
Through Chair. So in the collective agreement, most groups are 2.5% for 25-26. But if you were to look at the technical paper, the way it works is you have the salary. So the salary will go up to 2.5, and then there's a percentage on benefit. So the two combined is why you get roughly 3%.
And then the marks and all of that, taxes and all that. Then all the taxes and all of that.
That's all
part of it.
That's all that included.
See, taxes, we don't pay taxes on the salaries, right? We just pay, we get, let's say, 1% more, let's say $1,000 more to pay a teacher. We pay it directly to them. The income tax does its own thing, comes off that.
Just do it. So yes, so 2%, 2.5% is the salary. And then once you add the increase on the benefits, it's 3%. So there's no extra money. It's exactly the 3%,
Exactly.
which is, we can say, compensation.
Compensation is
That's all.
straight.
Yeah.
So, okay,
We got nothing for students.
you get nothing for students.
Okay, I see Trustee Benjamin, you're back online, so you have your hand up.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I don't know what happened. I just went off for some time. I know it's very interesting. In slide 4 that Tanya, showed us, there was a statement that ministry directs boards on what it funds. Now, in the last couple of weeks, I've been visiting some of my schools and also went with my MPP. And many of the schools in my ward are very, very old, 25 plus years. And so there's a lot of maintenance and renovation and of not only the school facilities, but even within the classrooms. And I'm just giving you one example of a classroom where the teacher said they would prefer whiteboards now. But, and is it possible to get rid of all the blackboards, because whiteboards are much more easier to use? And in addition to that, I think it was a math classroom where the teacher showed a desk, a round desk where students could sit together. And that was a whiteboard she had created by herself, because she asked for 7 whiteboards, but the principal could give her only 1. And then she bought the material to make another whiteboard so that students don't have to use eraser and pencil, but just the whiteboard chalk. And you can wipe it clean. So we have, as we are talking of empowering modern learners and we are providing our students with all the facilities to reach the skies, I think even the basic facilities have to be introduced. So I just want to know if that'll all be included in this kind of budget, and are we going to ask that funding from the ministry? That's just one thing. And
one question, Susan,
okay.
trustee Patrick, one question at a time, please.
Okay.
Through chair. So the ministry does not go down to those specifics in terms of funding. So they will give, let's say, in a benchmark X amount for school supplies and operating expenditures within this cost. And then we allocate it to the schools, and then it's for the school to determine their priorities. So, but typically it wouldn't be to the level of every school gets X whiteboards. So when I in this slide when I mentioned that the ministry basically influences or directs supports what they do, is what I meant by that is that when they provide funding, let's say for example, they provide funding for Indigenous, we can do more work on Indigenous because we have the funding. Or if they provide more, when they don't provide the funding for us because we don't have income from other sources, it's difficult for us to take on an initiative, especially a significant one, that we don't have funds for or cannot raise money for. So that's what I meant by it. But they don't actually go to that level of detail.
Okay, so just to add on to what you said, which means that it's the board which will provide these kind of funding for the schools, or the allocation to the principals, and the principals have to decide on where it goes. Is that it?
Pretty sure that's correct.
Okay. And the other thing was also a request by some of the kindergarten teachers that, they would like to make their classrooms more friendly and the environment more lively. So which means that, the walls of the kindergarten classes need to be painted and made colorful and so on and so forth. Once again, this comes under repair. So this again is within the purview of each school principal and the funds that are provided.
Through you, Chair. I'm not quite sure the question because you said repairs. Some of those didn't sound like repairs, but repairs would be through facilities and they would go to their facilities manager and who has funds allocated. But if it's just when you're saying colorful like supplies, that would be yes, the principal. But if it's more repairs, that would be through facilities.
Oh, thank you. So does it mean that I could make an application to facilities? Okay, can you do something for this particular school and so on and so forth?
Yes, Chair, I can start. My understanding is the principal, if there's a need, would work with their facility manager. And the facility manager has a certain amount of budget, and like anything else, again, has to prioritize and look at the different needs and the different requirements across all the budget they have.
Thank you. And my last comment, in fact, it's not a question, because we are talking of falling enrollment. And in one of my schools, that is Nahani Public Way, the principal said, I have a full kindergarten coming in next year. And I asked, what is the reason when all the schools around are saying that their student numbers are dropping? So he said, it's because of the condos in the area. So they have one full kindergarten class next year in, Nahani Way Public School. But at the same time, in another, which is same my ward, the principal also mentioned that this school was getting in a lot of asylum seekers and refugees, but all of a sudden there is none of these students are there, and the hotels are all empty because they all seem to have gone away. So I just wanted to share this with you. That could be one of the reasons for the drop in numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a quick comment, just for the trustees who may not be aware, and Carla could attest to this because both of us represent the board of the Ontario School Board Association, and I sit on the executive. And in terms of the spec-ed funding, it's an ongoing conversation with ministry staff. It's never staff. It's continue. There's two funding right now that there's continue in discussion is the spec-ed and the Indigenous funds to support those students. It is a continue And the last time we had one ministry staff to speak to the executive, they would have said to us that we spend the largest amount of money in hospital on the second the school board. And they making that statement is a message to us to say, okay, we're not gonna do more. So we just have to learn to live with whatever they give to us. We don't, boards don't create formula. The ministry decided what formula they want to use to support board. And we want to make sure that we continue the conversation. We'll continue advocating, but they are in government, and that's why it was so key that last week when we're taking our NPPs to school, we're sharing these conversations, we're having these conversations, because for myself, this is what I was hitting around and keep telling them, we talk about the unique need. I was not talking about any other boards. I was talking about Peel unique needs. And therefore, we need to ensure that when you're speaking to, because these are the lawmakers, these are the people that are making the decision. So we got to keep going at them. We can talk as much as we want at this table, but we got to go to the people that are making the decision in Queen's Park. So again, it's an ongoing conversation. It's a journey that never stops. I just wanted to let people know.
Thanks, Chair Green. Okay, Trustee Davies.
Just to make sure I fully understand this, so the funds per pupil has gone up 3%. Now, is it not a safe assumption to assume that not every dollar of that goes to salaries? So therefore, if it's increased by 3% and not all of it goes to salaries, then therefore there is some extra money?
No. Through you, Chair, to clarify, per pupil funding hasn't gone up by 3%. It's only the salary component has gone up by 3%. Wow. And then the other area which gone only up by 2%, which is non-staffing component. For that, it's the inflation. Yes. So overall staffing per people funding hasn't gone up by 3%. I just wanted to clarify. So there is no extra money.
There's no new money.
No money.
That we can spend.
Inflation, it's impacted.
And I think it's one of the, excuse me, please, just wait. I think it's very important, that they will say, we're giving more money to the school boards. No, you're not. If you're giving me more money, I could do more. I'm actually doing less with the more money because you're paying the salary increases of the staff, which is great, but you're not paying even the inflationary cost of the non-staff. And then we have more needs coming in the door that you're not even supporting us, as we've heard, on the special education component. Anyway, thank you for that clarification, Associate Director Jesswell. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Trustee Middleton.
Through you, Chair. Can you clarify for us, Principal, how many years has this been going on now? Because this last year was the same thing.
How many years?
That we have not had an increase. It's only been inflationary. Can you recall?
Theoretically. Yeah. So yeah, it's been going on for a long while. But what was working for us was the growth. 15 years, 20 years, as we all know, Peel was growing. When you're growing, that means your enrollment is growing. That means you're getting more money. So you have more sources to spend the way you could have spent it. I think the challenge for us now is, since COVID days, not only that because of the real estate become so expensive, not only that we have a decline in enrollment because the families just can't simply afford to live in Peel or in GTA, they're moving out. So that's number one. At the same time, we have many families who are moving to Peel where the children, they need special support. So our special support needs are going up at the same time. Third reason why we are in this situation is, along with many other boards in GTA, and I would say mostly even in the province, the absenteeism rate has gone up, huge. We used to, our absenteeism rate was around 14 days per staff. We're close to now 18. With over 20,000 staff, you can imagine how much each single day makes a difference. So, and again, I want to make sure most of the GTA boards are feeling the same. They're in absenteeism. So it's all happening at the same time. COVID is down, spec IDs are going up, absenteeism is up. That means we have to spend more money on coverage. When some staff is away, we have to cover while they're away. So all those things are happening at the same time when it's leading, but with no money, no additional money. Even on the supply cost, the ministry knows it. It's the data. Every board has provided the data. It's the data that is there. Zero extra money for the district on that. So again, even also on inflation, they're not covering those true costs either. We know, okay, maybe this year is just over 2%. 2-3 years ago, it was like 5, 6, 8%, we all know. But the ministry still only gave 2% additional for inflation. So I think it's been going on for the last number of years. I think the message from the ministry is, this is how it is, do more with less and spend wisely.
And just to add to that, so, trustee or chair Green and I have been around 23 years. We were overspent in special education and transportation then, and we're still overspent. They modified things and we're still overspent. So it seems very difficult. And when you look at all the funding is directly generated by, enrollment, which triggers teachers, which triggers staff. We have no control on, 80 some percent of the cost that comes into our board because it's, every 20 children in an elementary, you get a teacher. We can't say, oh, no, we'll do 20. We'd love, maybe they could change the 20 to 23 of 10%, and that would give some money and a little flexibility, but no. So to answer your question, long term, it's been this way. And it only wasn't this way when boards used to be able to raise taxes themselves. Anyway, any other questions, Trustee Bailey? Oh, okay, Trustee Clark.
Yeah, thank you for indulging my second question here. It's just more of a comment. Like, we've been good with our money. We're one of the boards that developed a big, surplus. So when times were good, we spent our money wisely, and we were able to do that. But now we've run out of room, right? So we've been good. So it'd be nice to get a little bit of appreciation. Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Clark. 23 years we balanced the budget, right? And it was easier when Associate Director Jasper Gill has said when we had growing budget because of more reserves.
Yeah.
But the last 3 years, it's changed and it's become very difficult. And you can look in the newspapers to see boards that are challenged with not passing, balanced budgets. And thank you for the team that works so hard to allow us to be, on the tip of making sure that we do the job right. And as trustees, we keep follow that line too, a balanced budget too. So it's much appreciated. Any other questions or comments?
Just one, Chair, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Please.
Something that David Wright, who's our what do you call it, financial guru at Officer, he mentioned is that with this new minister, you don't balance your budget, he's coming in. And he made that clear to the team that David Wright worked with. So, but the only thing I want to say is that we got an amazing team here at Peel, and we're going to make sure we balance the budget.
And so I guess common question. So when we took our MPPs around, we're given the information that Toronto is funded $555 more. Alex, I have a question out of that, but if you multiply the enrollment, that's 83 million. That we're not getting funded. And I told the MPP, I just want what everyone else is getting. not asking for something else to paint the hallways gold. I just want to use it because we're 50 million overspent in special education, which we really need EAs. We all know that. We're overspent a large sum in transportation, which again doesn't, it's okay. It's a need to we're a requirement to get students to school, but it's money that doesn't go into the classroom to help the learning. And that's a very difficult for me as a swallowing that we're 8 million overspent. And man, 8 million in the classroom can go, how many EAs would that be? Probably 200 EAs, something like that. That would be really welcome. But we have to transport because we have commitments of our boundaries that are following the provincial standards. So it's not, there's so many questions. Sorry, long introduction. I don't like doing that, but why is it that this Toronto board or other boards get more money per student than we do? Is it something that is it the formula not fair? I understand that it's not, we're not the statistics review of 2021 obviously is not fair and being phased in, but that's not going to make up $83 million.
Through you, Chair. So I think it's all those things that you've mentioned. It's in areas where there's variability, like again, the census data, they may be getting more in terms of certain dollars there. Also the mix of teachers, there's also a component there because again, for what everybody board has to call plotter teachers. Every single teacher goes on the grid, and if you have more senior teachers or more junior teachers, that gives you different funding. So there are different areas within the formulas that may shift, but you're correct. I think also in terms of Toronto's infrastructure, it's an older infrastructure, so I think there's certain areas that they get a little bit more money because of that. It could be also looking at how full their schools are, right? Again, there's a component for that. So there's a lot of different variables, and each formula is a little bit different. But I think when you mentioned about the classroom, everybody gets the same, right? So if it's X amount of students, X amount of, but it's the variability in other areas that would cause some of the disparity.
Thank you so much for that. So seeing no more questions, all those in receipt of this oral report. Okay, so pass. So we'll move on to the next item in the agenda, 7.2. So we're going to have the core education funding summary, and we're going to have a different presenter this time. Okay, I'll pass it over to your Associate Director, Joshua Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Now I'm going to culture our assistant controller to go through that presentation, where she will walk us through the different areas and comparing the funding that we received this year to what will happen to the funding that we expect the next year. And then the overall summary. And then at the end, we'll be happy to respond to any questions. So we'll pass on to Dr. Jill.
Thank you, Jasper and Pretty Chair. I will walk you through the core education funding numbers for the 25-26 upcoming school year. And I don't know if it's showing on the screen, it's not showing all the numbers, but I think you all got copies here of what I'm going to present. Before we go into the numbers, I just want to kind of walk you through the sheet just to understand how it works. On the left-hand side, you see the descriptions of the various allocations that Tanya has mentioned in her presentation. The next column would show the current year's budget, the 2024-2025 budget. This is our current year. The next year's budget based on enrollment that we have for next year, 25-26 budget. And then the first yellow column would show the budget change. So this is the year change. We take the 25-26 numbers minus the 2025 numbers, and that will show how much more funding we're getting this year. Then the last column is to explain what this change is about. We talked a lot about enrollment change and the salary changes because of the collective agreement. So this last column will do just that, like showing how much did we go up or down depending on enrollment and collective agreement. With that, I'm going to move to the first section of the sheet. So that's the enrollment, our daily enrollment from the Budget Development Committee, the last one. We had our colleagues from planning presenting the enrollment to us. And if you recall, the enrollment, and Tanya mentioned as well earlier, is projected to go down. So from 146,605 this year, we're going to 145,608 next year. A decrease of 957 enrollment, ADE. That 957 is made up mostly of elementary students, of 1,300 students, and we're actually seeing a slight increase in our secondary students of 427. So with that being said, we can look at the different allocations. The first one is the classroom staffing fund. So this is actually the largest of the core funding. Tanya walked us through the multiple elements under the classroom staffing fund. Just a reminder that this is really the staffing in the classroom. This is what this funding is about. And the first component of the classroom staffing fund is the per pupil amount. So the per pupil amount, if you recall from what Tanya showed earlier, it's depending on the class sizes, how many teachers will be funded, multiplied by the salary, which has gone up because of the collective agreements. So we can see for that funding was 761 million this year, going to 847 next year. So therefore a change of 88 million going into next year. And out of this change of 87 million, 87 million for next year, we will see the split on the last column. So the split is in terms of enrollment, because enrollment is going down, we're actually seeing a decrease in the funding of 6 million, whereas the salary increases will be 93 million. I just want to make a point here. I know what Tanya was presenting was comparing 24-25 to 25-26 being 6%. My spreadsheet here is also before what was announced for collective agreement, because remember at this point last year we were doing the budget, right? So we didn't even the ministry, we didn't have the new collective agreements built in here. So, and the collective agreement was retro, right? Because it's been multiple years. So that's why the percentage is more than the 3%. Plus we also had the bill 124. So it's the cumulative increases that you see under the compensation changes. Moving on to the next component is the language classroom staffing allocation. So this one we are at 81 million this year, going into 105 million next year. So an increase of 24 million. The good news here is that, as Dana mentioned, we are seeing students coming from outside of Canada on the increase, getting to the pre-pandemic level. And therefore, that's the reason why you see after the enrollment change, you actually see a positive $12 million. So that's good news, which will be contributing towards all the negative amounts that we see in that column. And of course, the 12 million in the compensation change is just because of collective agreements. Moving on to the next element, we have the local circumstances staffing allocation. So here mainly it's to cater for the differences in the remuneration of our teachers. In the per pupil amount, we have the basic of the salary for the teachers. And then in the local circumstances is where the ministry gives us the additional funding for the qualifications and experience. So like we mentioned earlier, some boards will get more money because the teachers are more mature, And that's why it's kind of a different element in the even in the forward funding, because that will differ from one board to the other. So here we do see, like if we look at the last column, that because of enrollment, so less teachers, so less funding, so that going to give us less funding in terms of enrollment change, 1.5 million. Whereas in terms of compensation, we still need to pay our teachers, so that at the new rate, so that's giving us an additional $25 million. The indigenous education, that's only for the teaching of the studies in the classroom, so that's not a big amount. And mostly we did see a little bit of FTE in that particular program, so that's bringing a little bit of funding in the enrollment and correspondingly in the compensation. The supplementary staffing allocation, so those are teachers that those are educators who are in the classrooms, but they are not teachers. They provide additional support to students who need them, right? So this is why this is under the classroom staffing fund. And here we see an increase of close to $1 million, but mostly under the compensation change. So overall, for the classroom staffing fund, we do see that the funding gone up by 135 million, but only by 4.5 million under the enrollment change, while the balance is to do with compensation. Moving on to the next allocation, which is the Learning Resource Fund. So as Tanya mentioned earlier, many of the elements that are in the classroom funding will be repeated here, except that they are not for the staffing. They are mostly for the non-staffing portion. For instance, the per pupil amount, we see the non-staffing portion, and as well as the language support. So if you recall from the presentation, they were showing you 3% for the staffing and 2% on the non-staffing portion. So here for the per pupil amount, we do see an increase of 6 million, but mostly for the compensation change. In the language supports as well, same as the per pupil amount. Under local circumstances, like this is for the qualification experience. So the teachers who fall under the Learning Resources Fund are our teacher librarians, guidance counselors, etc. So we do see that change here for about 1.2 million, mostly for the compensation. The next element is the mental health and wellness allocation. I'll do the mental and the next one as well, like the student safety and well-being, because both of those two elements would include our workers supporting our students, like our psychologists and all paraprofessional workers. So here too, we do see like a little bit of an increase, mostly to cater for the changes in salaries. The other item on the Learning Resource Fund is the continuing ed, because that's outside the regular classroom. A little bit of good news in the sense that we did see a little bit of increase in FTE here. So that's why you see under the enrollment column that we do have an increase of about 500,000. But again, with more students, we also have more expenses. So if we have capacity, means no additional educators. But if we don't have capacity, then it's additional educators, so therefore increase in spending. And of course, the last column is just compensation. School management allocation, that's the second biggest under the Learning Resources Fund. And this is where we have all our principals, vice principals, secretarial staff, and the learning materials. So here we do see a big increase of 15 million, but mostly you'll see that's for compensation for the remuneration of our principals, vice principals, and secretarial. And this year they were also placed on a grid, similar to the teachers, and there's a little bit of allowance amounts as well. The differentiated supports allocation, that's mostly for the needs. So the ministry does like Tanya mentioned, for the indigenous lead. The indigenous lead was also in the budget last year, but now they moved it under the indigenous funding. Here we have under the differentiated support allocation, the other needs that we have for student services, mental health, early years, etc. They are all combined under this component here. So overall, for our learning resources fund, we do see an increase of $26 million, but you can see that only insignificant amount is in the enrollment change, which we could have potentially used for something else than paying our staff. But we can now move to the special education funding, which if you see the portion, so we see an increase of 19 million, but most of this 19 million is also for the compensation change. If you look at the enrollment change, we're actually seeing a decrease in enrollment, so therefore a decrease in funding. Like we mentioned earlier, the biggest element under this special education funding is the per pupil amount, which the main driver is the enrollment, so therefore decrease in funding. The differentiated needs allocation, so this is where the ministry tried to address the needs among school boards using the statistics, the latest statistics within 2001, trying to allocate the funding among boards depending on the needs. And here we can see that the difference, including any increase in collective agreement of $5.2 million. So most of this funding we do use for our staffing costs. So that's why we have it at the compensation change here. The complex support allocation, this is where we have the SIP funding. So the special incidents funding. So this is for our students with high needs, including our Section 23 and Roy McMurtry. So here too, we don't see much of an increase other than compensation. The last but not least is the CR funding for the equipment. So we do see a little bit here. I have put the increase in the enrollment, mostly because this is claim based. So because the claims have gone up, so that's not for compensation. So I just put it in the enrollment. Okay. Then now move on to the school facilities funding. So the school facilities funding is mostly to maintain our schools, the heating, utility, etc. So everything is mostly is lumped under the school operations allocations. So here it goes by the square footage requirement that we need based on enrollment actually. So that's why we do see again a decrease in the enrollment column, whereas the compensation change has increased. So in that compensation is also the 2% increase in cost due to inflation, which I have also put under the compensation because that's also funding that's kind of committed to pay our bills. Moving on to the student transportation, so a bit of good news here. Although with the additional funding that we see of 4 million here, we are kind of breaking even with our transportation. I think that's good news. That's kind of a relief. So with the transportation services allocation, so with the new methodology of doing the funding formula, that now ask for the routing simulations. They've also recognized an increase of 2% for increased cost, as well as they're giving the HST non-refundable portion of 2.16%. So the ministry recognized that, and that's all included in the increase in funding that you see of $4 million. So, and you see that this $4 million is reported under the compensation change, but that's really going to the contracts for the transportation. Last but not least, we have the school board admin fund. So this fund is where we have all our trustees, the director's office, superintendents, and all the staff at the central board office, including the parent engagement funding. So there is a small proportion of it, especially for parent engagement and expenses for trustees that use the enrollment. So that's why you see a slight decrease in the enrollment column. And for the first element, which is trustees and parent engagement allocation. The next one is the biggest one. So that's the salaries of the staff. So here we do see an increase of 2 million, and that's a blend of all the people. So would include all union groups, right, from ASG, QP, etc. And that's where the funding is given. And therefore, that 2 million increase goes under the compensation change. And lastly, we do see a little decrease in the declining enrollment, because although we are still declining, we are kind of picking up, and but we're still getting the declining. So overall, the last line, you see core funding going up from 1.8 billion to 2 billion. So a net increase of 191 million, and the split of that 191 million is 2.1 million due to enrollment. And just a recap, it's mostly because of the ESL, the language grant, and the student transportation that student transportation is under the compensation. So the 2 million is really because of the language, offset by all the other deficits that we have. And the 189 million is compensation and other contractual that we have.
Good.
We can take any questions.
Thank you. So we'll put this on the floor. Trustee Bailey, would you put this on the floor? A second by Trustee Davies. So does anyone have comments or questions? Okay, Trustee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. So my questions are going to be related to spec ed funding. So I know when we're looking at spec ed holistically, we look at the last budget, we say it was $50 million was the cut. And through your chair, I think Jasper might remember, I think we dug into our reserves 7 million. We get to the $50 million figure because of we had to move money around. So I just want to understand. So when I have a conversation in the SEAC committee, a committee of which I am a member, and with members of the community, I want to be able to articulate to them how much money we're not receiving because the government and their funding formula isn't covering our needs. So I see here in red for special education funding, 126493. That's $1,264,934. Is that how much we're losing per pupil? Would it be fair for me to tell people, hey, from last year to this year, you're now seeing less, roughly 1.2 million for kids in classrooms because of the way this funding formula shakes out?
No, I'll get to that one. It's just on the moment.
Okay, so what's the total?
So I think the bigger question, and sorry to change your question, is really we spend more on spec ed, and that's the number that we should be talking about. The formula itself, the student enrollment driven and salary driven, and the only thing that I think I've heard from our team here is that it's the complex support allocation. We have more complex support, as Associate Director Jasper Gill talked about. We have more cases, but they changed the formula or application process that what you submitted 2 years, we're just going to keep it at that.
So through you, Chair, what I'm wondering is how short are we from last year to this year? How much are we lost?
So based on this year, our gap is 45 million. Now was 50, then we received some in-year funding. Ministry sometimes provides based on because your enrollment also changes, other factor changes. At the end of through the year, if there are changes, they will add and take away things. So where we stand now, this year is full gap of $45 million. So that means our expenditures, we're spending $45 million more than the funding that we are receiving in spec ed. So what this does is, what it's saying is, because our enrollment is still declining, so this is gonna add to that. So for 25-26, our funding gap will be even more than $45 million. And it will also depend upon, when we go through the budget, what else regional sports that the board is gonna include for spec ed area, and that's gonna build on to, so it will definitely be more than $45 million.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you very much for that response. I think, like I'm sure everyone at this table feels, I think it's shameful that there is this gap and that the government hasn't taken some things into account, like our complex needs and how to better support them. And it is only my hope that through the efforts of committees like this one and our CIAC committee and the efforts of all my colleagues around the table, that the ministry hears our concerns and adjusts the formula. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Alice. Any other comments or questions? So I just want to clarify and just make sure the understanding is correct. We're getting $4 million more in transportation, but that doesn't mean we're compensating $4 million overspent. That is to go for the regional programs that we're implementing in September, and that should be offset by that. So we're not really getting more funding.
That's correct. So the funding recognizes the routing for regional programs and also the driver retention that's mandated, and as well as the fuel component. So that will be what it's related to.
Thank you.
Those are flow through funds.
Thank you. The flow through, absolutely. So I'll just go back to, and I missed it. And I'm just trying to understand this chart. A language classroom staffing allocation. You have 12 million on enrollment change. Well, it's not an enrollment change, is it?
Through you, Chair. So what happens is we have to count students that have come in the different years. That's what we're calling enrollment, is because based on students. So for every year, we would say these are how many students that are first year in Canada, second year. So it's student based. So it's not about our ADE, but it's specifically based on the years in Canada for non-English speaking students.
So this money is allocated for English as second language.
That's what the funds for.
Okay, I understand. Thank you so much for that clarification. Perfect. Okay, all those in receipt of this oral presentation on our funding. So approved. Okay, we'll now go on to 7.3, our public consulting survey review, and that's going to be an oral presentation through Laura Naismith. I assume she's online. Oh, sorry, I missed her there. Right. Yep, you're right. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you. I'm happy to be here tonight to present the results of our recent budget consultation survey. So the budget consultation survey was an online survey that was conducted from May 2nd to May 16th of this year. The link for the survey was posted on our public website, as well as the PDSB intranet, and shared across social media. We had 1,046 participants respond to the survey, which represents more than double the number of respondents that we had last year, which was 468. So looking at the different response groups that were represented in the survey, the largest response group at 55% was PDSB staff. Next, we see PDSB students at 21% and PDSB parents and guardians at 18%. The remaining 5% accounted for here included various groups such as school council members, Peel region residents, representatives of community organizations, faith leaders, as well as those participants who selected I would like to describe or who did not disclose their response group. The survey consisted of 5 questions related to the budget. Participants were provided with descriptions of 10 priority areas. And the first question asked them to rank the budget priorities to where they felt PDSB should direct most of their spending. The 10 priority areas were determined based on the key priorities from the responsive education program allocations and from the funding pillars. These descriptions were provided in the survey to support the participants' understanding. So just go through, we've got the first five here, French language education, Indigenous education, learning resources, literacy, mental health, operations and school facilities, STEM, stands for science, technology, engineering, mathematics, student readiness, student transportation, and supporting vulnerable students. So when we look at where the respondents indicated that they felt that the areas that should be prioritized the most, in order to compare these, the 10 categories, they were assigned a weighted score based on how frequently they were ranked number one, number two, etc. One thing that's important to note is that each priority area was ranked number one by at least some respondents, so indicating that they were all of these priority areas are important. So based on the overall respondents' input, the top four priorities were literacy at 78%, supporting vulnerable students at 72%, STEM at 71%, and mental health at 62%. So providing a few comparisons and breakdowns here. The next slide here provides a kind of relative comparison by the three main participant groups, parents, students, and staff. So here we see that there's a lot of commonality. The top three priorities for parents and staff are the same, which are literacy, STEM, and supporting vulnerable students. While for PDSB students, there's a slightly higher prioritization of Operation School facilities compared to supporting vulnerable students. Another comparison that we can show here is comparison to last year's budget survey results, and we see very, very close alignment between the priorities for 2024-25 and the priority areas for 2025-26. Again, the same top four priorities being literacy, supporting vulnerable students, STEM, and mental health. Okay, thank you. The next set of four graphs represent questions asked about each of the multi-year strategic plan priority or goal areas. So this question asked about student achievement and which supports PDSB should prioritize for student achievement. And the top four priority areas here included literacy, STEM, learning resources, and supporting vulnerable students. Next question, when we look at the priority area of equity and inclusion and which supports to prioritize there, the top identified priorities were supporting vulnerable students, learning resources, and human rights and inclusion. For safety and well-being, the top priorities the top supports to prioritize include mental health and supporting vulnerable students. You can see there's a lot of overlap between these priority areas. And finally, community engagement supports to prioritize here include mental health, supporting vulnerable students, and literacy. So throughout these questions, the participants also had the ability to provide their own answers for additional areas that they thought that PDSB should prioritize in the budget. And so this list represents a combination of the priority areas that were identified by participants that did not kind of fit within the existing priority categories. And they included community engagement in the context of providing workshops for parents, sharing space with community agencies, facilities and resources, including air conditioning, better fields and outdoor learning spaces, school libraries, and technology. Learning opportunities, including arts education, physical and health education, financial literacy, and extracurricular activities. Safety and well-being, including addressing bullying and violence, washrooms, and vaping. Staffing and staff supports. Many comments here speaking to the need for smaller class sizes, more school-based staff, including teachers, EAs, custodians, and social workers, as well as professional development for staff. Student support and inclusion included, several groups were identified, including special education, English language learners, and students in kindergarten to grade 3. So that represents the summary of the public consultation results, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. So I'll put this on the floor. Trustee Davies, would you put on the floor? Seconded by Trustee Clark. Do we have any questions or comments? Trustee Clark.
Oh, no, that was just me.
Okay. A delayed second.
Well, no, you've asked me, and so I.
Okay. I have Trustee Davies.
Hi there. Thank you for compiling all this. I just wanted my colleagues to note that you know, if you break down 18% of 1,046 is roughly 200 parents and guardians. And we have over 200,000 parents and guardians in our system. So just take all this with a grain of salt, because we have less than 1/10 of 1% of everyone represented here. So I just thought I'd point that out.
Any other comments or questions? Trustee Promoli.
Through you, Chair, I just want to say thank you so much for the work you did in compiling this, and yeah, I appreciate the insight. I understand not every parent who responded, but I do appreciate learning what we did from members of our community who do want to give us feedback. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Trustees Satwal, Joel?
Yes, no, thank you, Chair. Thank you for this opportunity. I was just wondering, the additional focus areas, the last slide is interesting. Are we doing with this additional feedback something in this project?
Through you, Chair. The intent of the public consultation is for the trustees to see other input and have consideration as we go through the next step of the process in terms of the themes and the alignment to our strategic plan, as well as to other things that come forth through the different departments and through the schools. So just to see the alignment and to make sure we bring all the voices.
Anyone else? Okay, so before I call vote, so to Trustee Davies' comment, now statistically, if we have 1,000 people filling out a survey that represents 150,000 students, which, you know, okay, that's all the students don't take the survey because elementary, but and then the parents and so how statistically sound would you think this represents? Because we do polls on the whole election of the same number and or within the same percentage of voting, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I would say with the data that we collected, it would be very difficult to assess something like statistical significance because we don't know the comparison. We don't know the total size of the population that we're looking for. We don't know the specific representativeness that each of the participant groups cover. But what I would say is the consistency in the responses between 2024 and 2025 does speak to that. Perhaps it's the same people who are responding year over year, but that the views out there are very similar in terms of prioritization and have not changed significantly year to year. So I think that is one area to pay attention to. And in terms of the sort of qualitative responses or the described responses that are provided, that they are for the most part aligned with priority areas with some additional input based on, particular circumstances that these staff, parents, or students may find themselves in. So while it may not be representative, I still think it's important data to consider as part of the budget consultation process.
Great, thank you. Trustee Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose in closing, while we do have to take it with a grain of salt. I think it's very interesting that we're seeing, one of the highest, I think it was the highest area consistently across the variety of graphs you shared, was support for vulnerable students. I understand.
That was consistently high.
Yeah, and I understand that part of that population through you, Chair, is our students with special needs. And it's also interesting that of our entire budget, that is, again, the largest impacted group. And I just wish the ministry could take some time and read the responses to the surveys that we do get. While they're not, totally indicative of all of the concerns of the board, there's a trend.
Yes, indeed, and that came up in the qualitative responses as well. There was a strong advocacy for more special education support.
So just to make sure we're clear, supporting vulnerable students, that could be special education, but it could also be marginalized students.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, so I understand it. So
Students facing economic uncertainties, there's a broad categorization there.
for me, and now I'm commenting just before I close, on slide 7, when we compared the various groups, parents versus students, it was really interesting to see that the supporting vulnerable students was really, high difference compared to the other groups. And so they see it in the classroom and they want it. And I'm going, very perceptive. And also mental health. They want mental health more than the other groups. And learning resources. Obviously, they're feeling they're in the school and they're doing it. And that is an interesting takeaway. But I think I also want to thank you for aligning these to our strategic plan, because I think I see that coming out in the questions and the responses, and how you presented that later on in that perspective is very good, because we have some difficult choices ahead next month. And I think this information helps us make those decisions more informed to try to support the community and what their needs are and what our perceptions of them are. So thank you. So all in favor of this oral report? So received. So I think that basically concludes the last of our staff reports. So there's no communications, there's no trustee motions for consideration. There's no trustee notice of the motion. So we're gonna go, yes.
Through you, Chair, one question about the mental health conversation we're having.
Okay.
I'm wondering, Kimberly Jones, outgoing chair of Peel Secondary School Principals Association. I might wonder if perhaps we can probe and dig a little deeper, and I don't want to over survey our families or schools, to better understand and flesh out exactly what is meant with the kind of mental health supports that families would like to see in schools. Because I can assure you, anecdotally speaking, just last week, somebody came in and asked to see the nurse. And guidance counselors are often seen as mental health counselors in the schools. So I think if we are investing in that, and I firmly believe it is, I concur with the data, might just be understanding how best to invest that money.
So I would recommend you should delegate the curriculum committee, because that's under their mandate. And in that delegation, I think the trustees will then may spark, maybe a report or investigation into that kind of stuff. That being said, mental health to me is, I've experienced with my son, and it's something very important and needy. And you're right, it's a concern, especially when you read certain literature. Guidance counselors give mental advice when they're not really trained for that, or if they've taken a workshop. I mean, we have that really needs professional care. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but that's what I've read. So anyway, I recommend bringing that to the curriculum and your delegation. Anyway, thanks for the question. Anything else before we go to close? So Trustee Clark, you have German? Trustee Cameron, second that?
Yes,
All
sir.
in favor of German? So proceed.